So this video is going to be a bit of a shambles. I had really ummed and ahed about whether to try post this video at all, but I think there's an honesty to showing you what happens when things don't go well, be that things don't go well when you're filming, or also when things don't go well when you're working creatively. And so just a bit of background before I kind of cut to the various bits of the video, and just to make sense of what you're about to see. Basically, a couple of weeks ago, I filmed a video when I was up at my parents' in Yorkshire, and I filmed one where I mounted up this embroidery whilst I chatted about creative collaborations. And I really enjoyed filming it. It felt like it all flowed really well, and I think it made a really nice video. So I got back into the studio earlier this week, and I thought I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to film a part 2. I'm going to paint the frame now for the embroidery that I mounted up last time, and I'm going to talk to you all about kind of paid advertising and whether to do it or whether not to do it, and why we have decided to have a go at it the first time next year. But as I sat down, I just wasn't in the mood. I wasn't sort of talking articulately. I wasn't talking with any real structure. And in turn, I also wasn't painting a very good frame. And I know the frame design hasn't worked for the embroidery. And actually, overall, it just made for a really bad video because I was not talking excitingly and I was not showing you something I was proud of. So the issue was it's now painted, and so I want to instead show you bits of that video because I want to show you what happens when things don't go well. And I think when you watch it, you can see the fact I'm not fully committed to the conversation. I'm also not fully committed to what I'm working on creatively. And then I'm going to repaint this frame, and I'm going to explain to you why I don't think the painting on the frame worked the first time I did it. And I'm going to show you a new design that I think is going to be much more effective, much more complementary. So with that in mind, this is going to be a bit of a chaotic thing, but we're going to cut back to when I was very excitedly at the start of filming this video, showing you what I was going to do, and then I will bring you right back to here. As you can see, I am back in the studio in London again, and I am going to pick up where I left off last Sunday, and I'm going to finish painting the frame for this embroidery. So since the last video, it's all mounted up now. I've fully base coated the frame. So I've kind of pulled out this dark blue and then this bright teal here. Now where I'm at is that I need to decoratively paint the frame. And I initially planned to paint it, in the same style as this one. Can you see just behind me in the top corner? I planned to paint them in the same style because I thought they were kind of a pair. But then now I've had a bit more time to think about it, I'm not totally sure that that's the best move for this embroidery. And so what I think I want to do more is pull out a motif from within the embroidery itself. And this is a bit of an experiment because I haven't planned out what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go for it. So I have a kind of number of choices when it comes to the motif I want to pull out. And this is the sort of stuff we always talk about a lot on my decorative framing course. And I'm going to talk about something else whilst I'm painting. But basically, I have a couple of choices. I could do the crosses like I have in this one. And part of the reason for doing this crosses was because it pulls out the kind of motif within the tree here. And I've got the same motif in here. And so it's quite nice, the kind of cross effect. So that's one option. Or the other option I have is that I could do something to do with the stars, because it's this whole theme of this one is night fishing, and so I was thinking, I could do some stars for the border motif, but then the danger I make it look a bit too childish, a bit too kind of kids' bedroomy, and so where I'm sort of erring on the side of is either bringing out this zigzag. So it could be that I just keep it simple, always safest to keep it simple. It could be that I do like a double tiered zigzag going the whole way around the piece. Or the other idea is I could bring out this motif here. That motif, I could have a straight line along here, and then I could have the motif coming out. So I think both will work. I quite like the idea of going for a strong zigzag. My big worry is that it's gonna, compete. But anyway, so still on the fence, but in the meantime, I've tried to find some colours that I can use. And basically I want always with the colours for the colours to be as close to what's in the piece as possible. Obviously I've already got the dark blue and the teal, so for me it feels like I want my paint colours to bring out the other shades, so I want to kind of bring out the purples within the piece, I think. It's hard because not many paint companies use purple, and I really don't like mixing paint. I do think mixing paint is such an art form that I am far too impatient to learn how to mix paint. So I've gone out and kind of gone and had a look, and I think the closest I can sort of get is maybe this pale purple here, and then this sort of darker purple, this purple tulip. They work quite nicely. And the other colour that's quite nice is the eucalyptus, which is sort of paler than these two, but brings out that. So, question is, how to do a motif. So I could do 2 leaves, and then I could have a stripe with the leaves coming off it, so I could entirely replicate this border here. Or I could do the zigzag. Let me pause here. I'm going to go ask my team what they think, because I really strongly believe you should have second opinions on these things. Okay, so I have chatted it through and we have no consensus whatsoever. We each wanted a different motif. So I'm back to what my original thought had been, is I wanted to bring out the stars. So I think usually sometimes with this sort of stuff, go with your first instinct. And the difficulty with a design like this is there's so many different things I could do that you can sometimes become a bit clouded by all the various options. Whereas actually what I did originally want to do was just some quite big stars, keep it super simple, so I'm gonna stick to that plan. Before I begin kind of decoratively painting, I want to kind of mark the top and bottom of where I'm gonna paint to, so that I try to keep everything in a relatively harmonious size. Tape along the outer edge to the size that I want the stars to be, and as I said, I want them to be pretty big, because I think actually sometimes the smaller something is, the more, in a way, the more it can dominate. If I'm doing such a simple motif as this, I'll just make them quite big. It's always a bit nerve-wracking doing a new frame design when you haven't done one before, and I kind of repeat a lot of motifs throughout designs because of the fact often you'll find a frame style that you quite like. I do think when you are doing a frame style, it is always best to have it be as simple as possible, to avoid that, like I say, any kind of competing with what's going on within the frame. So, and I'm also going to tape my inner edge because I don't want to go right up to the edge. And whilst, you know, you could do this by just drawing a line on, it's so impossible to get pencil marks off frames. And I have varnished this frame before I go into the stage. I always varnish my base coats, and that's something we talk about a lot on the decorative painting course. Part of the reason for that is because it's hard to touch up base coats. So if I drew all this in a pencil, then I would be faced with the task of having to touch up loads of stuff, and I don't want to have to touch up, so I don't draw it in pencil. Then in terms of the colours I'm going to use, I think because of how much purple is in the embroidery, I want to bring the purple back in. So I think I want to use this darker one, and maybe I'll use these 2, because my worry is if I use one that's much lighter, like the Lavender Garden one, is it going to stand out too much? Basically, that's my big worry. I don't want things to stand out too much. Just doing a really simple, I've got loads of other frame motifs that have slightly more complicated star shapes, but I want to go for a real kind of traditional, classic, as if a child's drawn it, star shape on this frame, because it feels more like that's the simplicity of this design. If I go for something too complicated, I feel like it won't actually feel like it's coordinated with the piece itself. So there is one star in. Now the question I could have is, do I add a second colour at some point on top of it to sort of fill out the central bits, and maybe it's kind of makes the star itself more interesting. But I would always say start simple, and then we can add to it more, and it might be that we actually just put some dots between them in a second colour, and that might be enough. Or it could be that we put some kind of dots within it, and that might be enough. Okay, I am back. And this is the finished frame. This is the finished one that I painted to go with the piece, based on that previous video. And I want to first, before I go and sand it all back and start again, I want to explain to you why I don't think this design has worked at all. I can see what my intention was, and I think this is the bit where sometimes the intention can override what you know is for the best for a piece, because you have such a vision of what it could be like that you kind of forget some of those really basic rules that we all know. So what I really wanted with this frame was, when I started it, was for it to kind of reflect the stars, and I wanted it to reflect these star shapes, but actually in a way it becomes really forced and also a bit too childlike. So I think there's kind of three main things that are wrong with it. Firstly, the motif is too big and it dominates. I don't think that a star motif would be better if it was smaller. I think altogether the motif is not right for this design. I think it's too big. So that's my first issue. The second one is a challenge of geometric motifs. If you go with something that's very geometric like these, you are far more exposed if it's not quite right. So if your edges aren't neat enough, if your kind of lines aren't clear enough, if your shapes are too varied, it's really obvious if you're going for something geometric. And actually that's one of the reasons where if I was painting a geometric design, I would be far more inclined to use a stencil than any other types of designs, because I do think geometric ones are just not forgiving at all. And in this case, and I show you on this camera, in this case, just some of these shapes, just the edges of them aren't right. They're not tight enough. And because of that, it makes it look much more amateur, and it feels less folk arty. It feels like I've kind of tried quite hard, but I just haven't quite hit the note. So I think that's the other one. And then the third reason I don't think this works is that because I'm having quite large areas of paint, and rather than doing small motif, it becomes much more obvious when the paint is not a perfect match to the embroidery. So this one here is a pretty strong match to this, but this purple here is too red. There's too much red in this purple, and it isn't like any of these ones. This one's much bluer, this one's much deeper, a bit plummier. This is not the right purple, and when it's in such a large area as that, it really doesn't quite feel right. The issue I have is that I don't have the right purple for it, and I don't mix my paints, because I do think that I could spend a lifetime trying to learn how to mix paint and I still would never be a master. I think it's a really, really acquired skill, like mixing paint. And so when it comes to something like this, I work with what paints are available pre-mixed, and I have been all over. Purple is a really hard colour to find pre-mixed, and this is the best option I've found. So fine, work with the options you have. That's the option I have. If I use this in a really small area, you wouldn't notice between that and these ones here. If it was used in a small area, I wouldn't notice so much the fact it's a different tone. It's because I'm using it in such a large area that it proves an issue. So what I want to do is take this frame right back and actually take it back to what I very originally intended to do. I'd always had a really clear plan for this frame, and that was that it was going to match this frame over here. So I always intended to paint the frame in this same design as this one here. And the reason this motif works for this design is because it is reflecting elements in the design. Both these two embroideries have this tree, which is stitched in a trellis work. Both of them have the same tree, and that stitching there is what is being replicated through this frame design. It's a really nice frame design because it doesn't have to be too perfect. It feels really kind of natural to paint, brings in all the different colours, but it's not too dominant. And I just got all up in my own head about whether to do that or not, and I should have just stuck with my original plan and not doubted myself, not got carried away thinking, oh God, but there's stars in it, maybe I should do the stars. I should have known that stars are always going to be really hard to paint without a stencil. You know, it's really hard to try and do it. So I should have just stuck originally to the plan. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sand it all back, sand away that bad design. I'm going to sand away the bad memories of a bad video, and I'm going to rebase coat it, and then I'm going to come back on and paint it next week and leave it for the weekend to dry, and I'll paint a new decoration next week, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's paired with what it should be paired with, and then we can chat a little bit about what went wrong, I think, from the voiceover to the video, why I think the conversation felt so flat last week in a way that it doesn't feel now. Okay, I have just sanded this frame back enough, and I just want to say, why am I sanding it at all? And part of that is because when I've painted the stars on, I painted them on quite thick, and if I just went on and painted over the top of it, I would see those stars underneath. I'd see them sort of standing out, and I don't want to see them on the new frame design. As much as it's kind of part of the history of the piece, I also think it's kind of negative because the history of the piece in the long run, you know, I hope these pieces are around for decades and decades. The history of the piece will become detached from it, and I just want the piece to look as good as it can. So I kind of want to take the frame right back because I don't want to see that history on it. I know the history, but people in 10 years' time don't usually. So basically that is all sanded back enough. So I've sanded it back to a point where I've got a smooth coat of paint on it. And then all I'm going to do now is just go over the top and paint another layer of the new colour. This video might win a prize for how many days can I spend filming over in order to get to the final result. So now, new day, new week, second week, trying to produce just one video. But I painted, at the end of the last video, I'd re-base coated this frame up. I'd sanded away what I'd done before. I've repainted it, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to decorate the frame. I left it for the weekend to dry, and what I want to do with the decoration is go back to what was my very original plan before I got all up in my own head, and I'm going back to the plan of replicating the design of this frame onto this frame. Because they're sort of like a pair, I want them to sit together, and because the design of the frame replicates the trellis work stitching style in the piece, so I'm going to use my purples. I'm going to use these same colours, and then I'm going to overlay with some kind of brighter, stronger greens as my kind of crosses on them. And that is how I'm going to do the decoration. So whilst I move these out of the way, I'm going to paint. And what I wanted to do is, because when I was re-base coating up this frame, I talked a little bit about why I thought the frame design went wrong on my first video. The thing I didn't talk about was, why did my conversation go wrong on the first video? Give this paint a shake because it's really all separated inside. So here's my purples. And so just whilst I paint this, I'm going to be painting my crosses all around, and I've got 2 paintbrushes so I can be super efficient and paint the 2 crosses at the same time. That's my plan. So what I have written down here is a little structure to explain why I think the conversation went wrong before. And the first most important thing is, on the last video, I knew what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about paid advertising, but I'd had loads of comments from different people saying, don't worry about having a structure to your conversation, you know, just chat naturally, you can wing it and it will be nice. And I had listened to all that and thought, yeah, actually, you know what? I think about these topics all the time. I'm just going to wing the conversation because, as people say, I should just be able to talk like that. It's how I would talk freely with the team. But there's a really uncomfortable difference between talking about something in real life versus talking about something on video. And the moment I didn't have a structure, I could hear myself going wrong. I was saying things like, so, doing a load of filler words, which to me suggests that I'm not particularly comfortable talking about the topic I'm talking on. So how's this going? And part of the idea of not wanting to have a structure was that I wanted to be able to talk in a way that made it feel really natural, feel really authentic, talk casually. But actually, by not having a structure, I felt far more afraid of talking naturally because I didn't know what points was I trying to cover, what things did I really want to make sure I say, what things were not really relevant. And instead I started panicking, going all up in my own head as I was talking, thinking I'm missing points here, there's no flow to this. And actually, to me, not having a structure was really not at all liberating. If anything, not having a structure made me feel a lot more trapped. Whereas by having a structure to the conversation, I felt a lot freer, which is why I've now written down a structure for what I want to talk about now. And you can already tell I'm talking more comfortably about this because I have a structure here. And so that's why I think it's different for different people, and it's different for what you want. But if you're recording yourself talking to camera, which is inevitably always something that doesn't feel particularly natural, like it's not a natural thing to sit here and talk to camera. It's not something businesses used to do. It's something we now do in this day and age because of the fact that we have a much more direct relationship. And I really enjoy it. I enjoy listening to people. I enjoy watching people do it. But we would be kidding ourselves, and I would be kidding myself as a viewer, and I think you'd be kidding yourselves, that if I did just sit here in silence, as much as for some of you, you would still watch the video because it's sort of, there's something kind of meditative and calming about it. Actually, for a lot of people, you'd move on to the next thing because we have so many different things fighting for our attention. And if you don't catch someone's attention, you don't retain someone's attention, they're going to move on from the video. And obviously, inevitably, there is a reason I am doing videos like this. There's a reason we spend so much of our week recording videos and also so much of the team's time editing them. It's because we see a direct flow through of, if people watch really a video and people enjoy the video, then they come to the website and they look at what are we doing. And therefore, what I need to do is have videos that retain attention so that you get to a point where you think, oh, I really enjoyed that video. I'm going to go look at this business. I'm going to go look at what they do. So as much as I could say, oh, you know, I don't want to hook you in, I don't want to retain, I don't want to kind of play an attention game. The reality is I have to for my business. And so if I record a video without any structure, what inevitably happens is you'll switch off and you'll move on to a different thing because I'm not going wham, bam, bam, here's a load of information. My videos that have done best, say ones like Finding Inspiration, that one, the first one we did on Finding Inspiration, is so structured. There is so much order to it. Everything is segmented down, and that is why that video has done so well. One of the concerns with filming a load of videos where every single conversation I have is actually thought through in advance is this idea of, oh, is it inauthentic to kind of have a conversation flow which doesn't, is it inauthentic to have to write down in advance what I'm going to talk about? That's one of the concerns. But my thought on it is actually, I'm just telling the story in a better way. I'm making a well-told story. And so if I actually just take the time in advance to think about what I'm going to say, it's not that it's less authentic, it's just that I say it better. So I think doing all this has taught me that for me personally, I am not the kind of person that can operate without a structure. And honestly, whatever made me think that I was, I mean, if you've watched any of my virtual courses, any of our freestyle ones, if you've been to any of my workshops, if you know me at all, you'll know that every single part of my creative process is incredibly structured. And so what on earth possessed me to think that, oh, I'm the sort of person that can just sit down with a camera and come out with a really easy structured conversation, because that is not the way I work. I have everything is very organised because that's how I feel most comfortable. That's the structure I feel most comfortable in. Off the back of this experience, and that's partly why I wanted to try kind of make something from the ashes of all these videos, was I wanted to show you the bits that go wrong, to explain that when I do sit for a video with my little list of the things I'm going to talk about, that's because that's how I will be comfortable and that's how I will produce the best video. And what I've learned through doing this is you have to learn the way that works for you, and my way is definitely not what works for everyone. And I watch loads of people who just chat happily without it. I now know, having got it wrong, what's for me, but I wouldn't know that if I hadn't tried. So I think this is all a big life experience thing for me, of another kind of know thyself type moment. You only get to know what works for you by experiencing it when it doesn't work for you. and it will apply. It's a really useful experience I've had, because that will apply for any kind of big meetings I go to, for any presentations I'm giving. I am not the kind of person that can wing it. I've tried it in all this, and if I'm ever wondering, can I wing it as a person, I can just watch this video back and I will see, no, I can't. So again, it's push yourself out of your comfort zone, try something different, and if it doesn't work for you, go back to what you were doing before that was working. And so with that in mind, I am going to pause this now, because you can see I've basically got one side of my crosses done. I am going to keep going, painting my crosses, and then I'm going to bring you back again once I finish painting the crosses, and that way you can see how it all looks with the new frame. And I already can tell from what I'm doing right now, I already just feel so much more comfortable that this is the right design route for this piece. Right, I have just finished painting the frame, and I've painted exactly the same design as the other frame, the one from this kind of wide landscape that I felt like they were a sort of pair. I've painted the frame exactly the same style, so I'm going to now put the embroidery into the frame, and I already know this is going to be much better. I've used exactly the same colours as I've used on the previous design. There we go. Here is the frame, and it's just a super simple motif, but the motif brings in all the colours from within the embroidery itself. But because I'm using the colours in much smaller areas, you won't notice as much that the colour's not an exact match, that it's not totally perfect. So grab my embroidery, I'm going to put it inside and put the back on. There we go, all framed up, and this one is just so much better. It's not so dominant as a frame that the embroidery doesn't stand out for itself, but it's got enough detail going on that it still feels in keeping. And actually, these crosses work so well on this because they do sort of have that reminiscence of the Starry Night thing. Now, they are still slightly different in terms of across the two different ones. The X's on this one are a lot further apart than on this one, and that just wasn't intentional necessarily. I don't measure as I go, I just kind of try to get an even number in the space. But they do sit together really nicely, but also they're very much standalone pieces. So I am pleased with the outcome, and I hope altogether it was still worth showing you this video. I think pulling all this together and showing you a video of when things don't go so well hopefully shows you that it's not just expected every time I record a video that it will be a good one. And I am learning as I go and as I do this, and I'll keep experimenting. But yeah, let me know what you think. Were you glad that I shared this?